Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're on to bag E, where we're adding lots of bits to the chassis. We've got lots of small fixings in the bag, along with some metal mounts and the rubber mud flaps. We won't be using all of them though. The plan is to build enough so we can work out the electronics and the wiring. Also enough that it looks presentable, more or less like a truck. Right then, bag E, step 25, the battery holder. We need two 3x8 self-tappers, two large 3mm washers, one hexagonal mount and a large body clip. For plastic we have D3 the door and D1 the battery holder. And unlike most Tamiya trucks we have the newer square battery holder, which, while still a bit limited, is far more LiPo friendly. Essentially you still need the wires to come out the end of the pack like a 9mm, otherwise there should be loads of packs that will fit. First we fit the hexagonal mount using a cross wrench. It's essentially a coarse threaded screw with a bit on the top for a body clip. We need to thread it in so the hole runs in line with the long side of the holder. A little bit of extra leverage can be handy for the last tweak to set the angle. The coarse thread really does dig into the plastic. Next up is the door, and its hinge pin just sits in pockets on one side of the holder, and then we use the two screws and the washers to hold it in. Nip them up, then loosen them a little bit at a time until the door can swing fairly freely. We don't need to be too worried about it though, just as long as it's not too stiff. If anything, a little bit of friction is good so the door doesn't keep falling shut when you're trying to put the battery in. To keep the door closed, we just clip in the body clip. Simple. Tamiya also want us to stick some foam strips in there, but I'm not going to bother until I've decided on the battery. We might need a bit more, or maybe even a bit less padding. Step 26, fitting the battery holder and a couple of wheel arches. We need 4 M3x8s and 2 of the very long M3x60s. Y7 and Y9, the front bits of the rear arches, the battery holder and the chassis. Now the battery holder sits on the spacers we fitted right near the beginning of the build, and it uses 4 M3x6s to fit. Tamiya do want us to use some thread lock, but I'm not going to bother just yet, partly because it's useful to be able to cleanly remove the battery holder, plus for now we're doing a mostly dry build, so no glue or thread lock. We're going to be taking most of this apart again in the future for some paint and mods. The arches fit with the long screws, and for now we'll just take up the slack, but when we come to fitting the arch tops we'll need to loosen them again to get everything to line up. And of course it's the same on both sides, so quick and easy. Step 27, the middle arch ends. We need 4 M3x10s, 4 M2x8s, 4 M3 plain nuts, 4 M2 plain nuts, 2 Y10s, 2 Y8s and 2 Y3s. Now each side needs a Y8, Y3 and Y10 sandwich with 2 M3s and 2 M2 screws and nuts. There's really nothing to it. Install the screws, tighten the nuts, repeat with the other side, and they're ready to fit. Right, step 29, fitting the middle bits. We need 4 M3x15s, the middle bits, and the chassis. All we do is offer up a middle bit to the chassis and install 2 screws. For now we'll just take up the slack, but as before we'll need to loosen them again when we fit the arch tops. Step 30, tail lights, which is going to be super quick, even quicker than the previous one. We're only supposed to be gluing in the lenses and fitting LEDs. Now of course we're doing a dry build, so we're going to skip all that, so H6 and H7 are ready to go just as they are. Step 31, rear arches and flaps. We need 2 M3x6s, 4 M2x5s, 4 2x8 self-tappers, 2 M3 plain nuts, the 2 metal brackets, a couple of mud flaps and 2 Y5s. There's also 2 U12s for the number plates, but they need glue, so we're going to skip them. Right, first we can attach the bracket to Y5 using an M3x6 and a nut. For now, just take up the slack so the bracket can still move to line up with the other holes. Next we press a mud flap into the round bits on the back of the tail light. Work the rubber on and flatten it out. It should grip well enough to stay put while we offer it up to the arch and we thread in 2 M2x5s just under the lights. Then from the inside of the arch we can thread in the 2 2x8s. When all the screws are in, go around and nip them up, making the assembly ready to fit. And of course we need to make 2, the second one just being a mirror image. Step 32, fitting the taillights. We need two hex-headed M3x12s, two 3x8 self-tappers, the chassis stay or bar, the chassis and the rear lights. To fit, we offer up to the chassis and use a self-tapper in the outermost hole. As usual, for now we'll just leave it a little bit loose so we can line up the other screws. In the inner hole we use an M3 screw. Now access is a bit tight, so some tweezers do come in quite handy, and we position the bar between the inner holes and screw in the screw. It's hex headed, so we use an Allen key, which helps a lot with the access. I think with a normal screwdriver you wouldn't get a good angle. Do the same on the other side, but don't nip up the screws. When we fit the arch tops in the next step, it does help to have the lower bits of the arches a bit loose so we can line everything up. Step 33, the arch tops. We need 16 M2x4s, 2y4s and 2y6s. Now before we fit the arch tops, it's a good idea to thread a screw into each hole and remove it again. When the tops are in position, it can be a bit of a pain to get the threads started, so forming the threads now does make life a lot easier. Then we flip the chassis over and offer up an arch top and start threading in the screws. The arch tops do have a right way round. On one side they have cutouts for the dampers, so if the arch doesn't fit, it's probably on the wrong side. Once a side of arches is complete, go around and nip up all the screws mounting them to the chassis. Repeat on the other side, and that's the arches done. Step 34, exhaust box. Now we will of course need the exhaust box, W6, and the cap U14. They need painting, so I've done that off camera, and I've also glued the cap on. We also need W12, the bottom plate, and two 3x8 self-tappers. Now if we were using the Tamiya MSC, this would be a bit more involved, as we'd need to disassemble the control box and fit the panel, but we're not, so we just offer up the bottom plate and install two screws. Now we'll probably make use of the box though, as it's still a useful out of the way spot for some electronics, or maybe even a custom control panel. Okay, step 35, fitting the fuel tank, exhaust box and the last bit of the battery holder. We need a M2x8, the magnet, and 6 3x8 self-tappers. For plastic, there's the exhaust box we just put together, W11 and U15 that make up the fuel tank, which again I've painted off camera and glued the cap on. When we get to it, there's a D2, the end piece of the battery holder, and a Z4, the magnet mount. We'll fit the magnet first, so it's not rolling off grabbing anything ferrous. All we do is pop the M2 screw in the small hole at the bottom, and then insert the magnet into the big hole and offer it up to the rear side skirt mount on the right of the chassis. Now this is easier said than done, as the magnet will do its best to try and escape, but once it's lined up, all we do is thread in the screw and nip it up. Now, since we really don't want to have this screw work loose and the magnet escape, this is definitely a good time for a bit of thread lock. Next we'll fit the fuel tank, which should just offer up to the left side of the chassis, but the metal servo arm we're using is far too long and gets in the way. So before we fit the tank, I'm going to remove the arm and cut the end off. It should have just enough clearance. My only concern is a little bit later we'll be fitting some tread plate to the top of the tank, and that goes right up to the servo arm, so we might need to do a bit more fiddling. For now though, we can offer up the tank and fit the two screws. Once they're in, we can fit D2, the end bit of the battery holder, with two more of the screws. On the other side, we remove the body clip and open the battery door, offer up the exhaust box and install the last two screws. Close the door and reinstall the clip, and that's step 35 complete. And now I'm going to have to leave it there for this week. Not quite as far as I wanted to get, and the steps in this one were a bit short and sharp, but the chassis does look a bit more like a truck now, so it's still good progress. Next time we've got the coupler, and we'll end up with the wheels on for a rolling chassis. Okay, as always, thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!